On paper, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, sounds like a pretty stand-up organization. They're supposed to be the junior watchdogs of Wall Street, the guys in the striped shirts making sure everyone plays fair in the stock market. They set the rules, enforce them, and are supposed to protect investors from the sharks. But what happens when the watchdogs need watching themselves? What if the very system designed to protect investors is actually rigged against them? This isn't some conspiracy theory we're spinning here. We're talking about real people, real money, and a system that seems to have gone seriously off the rails. We're about to dive deep into the murky world of FINRA. A world where things aren't always as they seem. Buckle up because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Let's start with a simple question. Who's really calling the shots at FINRA? Is it a neutral body looking out for the little guy? Or is it something else entirely? The truth might surprise you. FINRA isn't some government agency. It's a self-regulatory organization, or SRO, which basically means it's funded and largely controlled by the very industry it's supposed to be regulating, the brokerage firms. Think about that for a second. It's like the fox guarding the hen house, except the foxes get to write and choose whether to enforce their own rules. And that, my friends, is where our story begins. A story of obvious conflicts of interest, questionable decisions, and a system that seems to favor the powerful at the expense of the average investor. Deep within the labyrinthine corridors of FINRA lies a powerful group known as the Uniform Practice Code Committee, or UPC for short. These folks in many ways are the gatekeepers of the stock market game, responsible for advising and making recommendations to FINRA concerning the rules that govern trading on the OTC market. If there's an issue related to the clearing and settling of transactions, they're likely involved, figuring out what to do when there's a glaring error. You know, like when someone accidentally sells 1 million shares for a penny, and navigating the often complex world of corporate actions. In theory, the UPC should be a neutral body, ensuring fairness and transparency for all involved. But as we'll soon see, the reality might be a little more complicated. Because when it comes to the UPC, the devil is in the details. Details that often get overlooked until it's too late. So, who are these all-important members of the UPC? Are they seasoned regulators with years of experience protecting investors? Well, about that, the UPC is actually composed primarily of representatives from member firms, the very same brokerage firms that FINRA is supposed to be overseeing. It's a system based on the idea of peer review, but critics argue it's more like the inmates running the asylum. Imagine a football game where the referees are all players from one of the teams. Sure, they might know the rules inside and out, but would you trust them to be impartial? That's the kind of potential conflict of interest we're dealing with here. Now let's talk about a security known as MMTLP, because this is where things start to get really interesting. MTLP was a trading symbol that represented the assets of a company being spun off from its parent company. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, hold on to your hats, because the corporate action, the instructions on how this spin-off was supposed to work, was anything but straightforward. In fact, it was riddled with inconsistencies and discrepancies, raising red flags for anyone who bothered to take a closer look. And who was responsible for reviewing and approving this messy corporate action? You guessed it, the UPC, that committee of industry insiders we talked about earlier. Coincidence? Maybe. But as we dig deeper, the pieces of this puzzle start to paint a very troubling picture. Remember how we said the UPC is made up of representatives from brokerage firms? Well, it turns out some of those firms were also heavily involved in trading MMTLP, and here's where the conflicts of interest become impossible to ignore. These firms had a vested interest in how the MMTLP corporate action played out. After all, their clients were buying, selling, and lending this security, and any hiccups in the process could mean big profits or losses for them. So, let's recap the people responsible for overseeing this complex corporate action also happened to work for companies that were actively trading the stock in question. Does that sound like a recipe for disaster? Because that's exactly what they had on the menu, but the worst was yet to come. Ooh. The MMTLP spinoff was already a head-scratcher, but things went from confusing to downright shady when the corporate action, the official instructions for the spinoff, was released. It was like someone had mashed up a legal document with a game of Mad Libs. Key details were missing, deadlines were shifting, and the whole thing seemed designed to confuse investors. But hey, maybe these were just honest mistakes, right? After all, even Wall Street wizards mess up sometimes. Except, here's the kicker. The very same committee that approved this mess? Yep, you guessed it. The UPC later used these mistakes as justification for a move so drastic it sent shockwaves through the entire market. They first revised the corporate action, essentially changing it from a spin-off by the company into a mandatory exchange by FINRA. Then the very next day, they halted trading in MMTLP. No buying, no selling, no nothing. It was like hitting the pause button on a runaway train. Except for the investors trapped on board, it felt more like a crash landing. Now, FINRA's official line was that they halted MMTLP to protect investors that might have purchased MMTLP after December 8th, not knowing that they wouldn't be entitled to the next bridge hydrocarbons distribution. The problem with this excuse is that both MMTLP corporate actions clearly stated that purchasers of MMTLP after December 8th, 2022 will not be entitled to the next bridge hydrocarbons distribution. In addition, Charles Schwab and TD Ameritrade, two very well-known brokerages, informed their clients that new buys in MMTLP after December 8th wouldn't be permitted. Those orders would be routed for review and then canceled. Any good till canceled orders already in place before December 8th would be canceled after December 8th. Charles Schwab and TD Ameritrade didn't just say they wouldn't allow new buys after December 8th on a whim. This was in response to the line included in both corporate actions concerning not being entitled to the distribution. Why would any brokerage read this line and then allow their clients to purchase MMTLP after December 8th? Why did FINRA think this messaging wasn't clear? On December 7th, one day after FINRA posted the initial MMTLP corporate action, the then VP of OTC Markets, Jeff Mendel, made an appearance on Trader TV Live. In this appearance, Mendel, along with Trader TV Live host Brendan Wickens, repeatedly informed viewers that the last day to trade MMTLP was December 12th. Communication from other brokerages to their clients included guidance on what they could expect regarding trading in MMTLP after December 8th. There were plans to liquidate short positions, and there was clear guidance indicating that December 12th was the last day to sell MMTLP. Behind the scenes, though, there were concerns about the construction of the corporate action, and the DTCC requested a meeting with FINRA and representatives of the issuer after the release of the first MMTLP corporate action. FINRA never showed. Who was the group that made the whole thing so confusing in the first place? Think logically. December 13th wasn't included in any of the publicly available information from NextBridge Hydrocarbons or Metamaterials. Including December 13th in the initial corporate action made the corporate action deficient. Inserting an incorrect date is not an easy mistake to make, especially when there are multiple individuals participating in the process. If certain brokers stood to gain by not having to close MMTLP short positions in a small time frame, and if those same brokers had the ability to manufacture an extraordinary event, who would you guess had their fingerprints all over the MMTLP corporate actions? Yep, you guessed it again. The UPC, that Committee of Industry Insiders, or at the very least the committee liaisons Patricia Casamates and Christopher Stone, should have known better than anyone that there were obvious problems embedded in the corporate action, and obvious concerns related to investigations that likely should have prevented the corporate action from being posted. So, FINRA halts trading to protect investors from a problem they themselves created? It's enough to make your head spin faster than a day trader on Red Bull. It's like a chef serving you a burnt meal and then blaming the oven. The MMTLP trading halt wasn't just some obscure Wall Street event that only finance nerds cared about. This thing blew up. We're talking trending on Twitter, now known as X, multiple interviews including with Fox Business host Charles Payne, Reddit forums in meltdown mode, the whole 9 yards. And for good reason. Over 65,000 investors were suddenly locked out of their investments. FINRA prematurely took away their ability to sell. A move that even Vlad Tenev of Robinhood referred to as significantly worse than removing the buy button. Their money was essentially held hostage. The extraordinary event was that FINRA wasn't sure if some brokerages were capable of the same level of comprehension as Charles Schwab and TD Ameritrade. FINRA's solution to a hypothetical problem was to U3 Halt trading, inflicting actual harm to 65,000+ investors and their families that held MMTLP at the time of the halt. The MMTLP saga isn't just about a bunch of stock traders crying over their portfolios. It's about something much bigger. It's about trust. Investors need to trust that the system is fair, that the rules are applied equally, and that the people in charge are actually looking out for them. But when you see something like this happen, when you see a regulatory body seemingly working against the very people it's supposed to protect, it erodes that trust. And when trust is gone, what's left? Cynicism? Apathy? A free-for-all where the big guys always win and the little guy gets trampled? The MMTLP story is a wake-up call. It's a reminder that even in the supposedly well-regulated world of finance, things aren't always what they seem, and it's a call to action for anyone who believes in a fair and transparent market. Remember how we said the MMTLP situation reeked of a cover-up? Well, hold your nose, because the stench gets stronger. It turns out there were whispers and hushed conversations happening behind closed doors long before the trading halt hit the news. We're talking about backroom dealings between FINRA, potentially the SEC, broker-dealers, and who knows who else. These weren't your average office gossip sessions. These were high-stakes discussions about preventing settlement. And it seems some people knew exactly what was coming. And where's the proof, you ask? Buried deep within a mountain of Freedom of Information Act requests, like a smoking gun in a dumpster fire. An email thread from the one and only FOIA request that was granted revealed a disturbing pattern of communication between FINRA and several redacted names from the SEC dating all the way back to November 2021. It seems that while FINRA was busy protecting investors by keeping them completely in the dark, they were more than happy to chat with the SEC about fraud tips, complaints, and coordinating fraud and manipulation investigations. Funny how that works, isn't it? Picture this. December 5th, 2022. The markets are buzzing, investors are planning their moves, and somewhere in the belly of the financial beast, FINRA is sending emails to the SEC. Casual Monday, right? Not so much. Thanks to the heroic efforts of a very persistent community member, we have a glimpse into what went down directly under the noses of the investing public. And let me tell you, it ain't pretty. FINRA officials were caught red-handed, admitting they were actively bluesheeting MMTLP and its parent company, MMAT. Now, for those of you who aren't fluent in Wall Street jargon, bluesheeting basically means they were investigating potential violations via requesting and examining trade data from various broker-dealers. So they knew something was fishy. They were sniffing around, digging for dirt. But did they warn investors? Did they even drop a hint that something might be amiss? Nope, not a peep. Let's talk timelines for a second, shall we? Because when it comes to the MMTLP fiasco, the sequence of events is more suspicious than a politician's campaign promises. Remember that confusing, error-riddled corporate action we talked about? The one that was supposed to explain how the MMTLP spinoff would work? Well, after what seemed like a delay, it was released on December 6th after what we later learned was from Pete Sessions contacting FINRA for some odd reason. December 8th, 2022. Just 2 days later, the corporate action was re-released. Why? Good question. Maybe they found a typo? Or maybe, just maybe, they were trying to quietly paper over some rather large cracks in the whole operation. December 9th, 2022. And then, boom. FINRA drops the hammer and halts the trading of MMTLP. Talk about a 1-2 punch. It's almost like they were just waiting for the right moment to pull the plug. Now you might be thinking, hey, maybe FINRA was just being cautious. Maybe they really were trying to protect investors by halting trading. And hey, maybe Bigfoot's out there filing his taxes too. But if FINRA was so concerned about protecting investors, why didn't they say anything? What did they find in regards to MMAT that might have protected those shareholders from the dramatic drop in share price they've continued to experience? Remember, FINRA was aware of the circumstances that led to this preferred share placeholder becoming tradable. They participated in the process. They were also aware of the online community that formed around MMTLP. It was all over the internet. While there were many people that received their shares as a result of holding TRCH through the merger, there were also people that added to their positions, and/or made their initial investment after MMTLP became tradable. And FINRA knew it. Yet they chose to stay silent. They let the rumors swirl. They let investors make decisions leading up to the halt based on incomplete and misleading information. And then, when it appeared that the investing public had the upper hand, and that FINRA's member firms were about to potentially suffer losses as a result of irresponsibly holding short positions and continuing to short MMTLP all the way up until December 8, 2022, FINRA's UPC committee halted trading, an apparent conflict of interest due to their own exposure to MMTLP short positions. But they acted like they were heroes coming to save investors that might have somehow been able to buy MMTLP after December 8th. The MMTLP trading halt wasn't just a blip on the radar of the financial world. This wasn't some technical glitch that was fixed overnight. This was a seismic event, the aftershocks of which are still being felt by tens of thousands of investors. Imagine logging into your brokerage account only to find out that your investments, your hard-earned money, has been frozen. Your money is essentially being held hostage, and the people holding the keys are about as communicative as a brick wall. That's the reality that over 65,000 MMTLP investors were confronted with when the trading halt hit. Their life savings, their retirement funds, their children's college funds, all locked up in limbo with no clear answers and no end in sight. Many of these investors were regular folks, not Wall Street hotshots. They were teachers, nurses, firefighters, people who had put their faith in a system that promised them a fair shot at building a better future. And what did that system give them in return? A swift kick in the teeth and a whole lot of silence. And we're familiar with the saying, well, you shouldn't invest what you can't afford to lose. Agreed. But why doesn't the same apply to those that were actually on the losing end of the MMTLP trade? If the MMTLP fiasco is just another case of dumb money, how do you make sense of FINRA's member firms being on the other end of the trades? The ones that benefited from the trading halt since the final 2 position-close-only trading days didn't occur as planned. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, FINRA was yet to elaborate on their reason for U3 halting MMTLP. Then, 3 months after the U3 halt, on March 16, 2023, FINRA released their first MMTLP FAQ. It was here that they acknowledged the true December 14th MMTLP share cancellation date that didn't appear in either MMTLP corporate action. This December 14th date should have also been the overall effective date of the corporate action with a time that corresponded to after the close of market. This would have been consistent with the actual exchange as described publicly by NextBridge Hydrocarbons and Metamaterials, November 18th and November 23rd, respectively. So while some may say investors should be grateful that FINRA went out of their way to explain the halt in their FAQs, they never really explain how December 13th became the main focus of the MMTLP corporate action. It should have always been December 14th. While FINRA offered an explanation for the inclusion of symbol deletion on the revised corporate action, FINRA never explained why it was prudent to delete the trading symbol essentially 2 trading days before the true share cancellation date. When you observe examples of exchange-type corporate actions from both before and after MMTLP, you will not find any mention of symbol deletion, and the effective date of the corporate action always coincides with the actual date of the exchange. But here's the worst part. It doesn't matter who created, modified, or revised the MMTLP corporate actions. According to FINRA's Rule 6490, it's FINRA's role to identify an issue related to settlement and clearance before, the key word here is before, the corporate action ever reaches their daily list. According to Rule 6490, there are 5 basic criteria in which FINRA is supposed to consider before a corporate action can be made public via their daily list. If you search Patricia Casimit's deficient in Google, you'll find several examples of Rule 6490 deficiency notices where it only takes one of the 5 criteria for FINRA to deem the submission deficient. The MMTLP submission had at least 3. The first being that FINRA had actual knowledge that the issuer, associated persons, officers, directors, transfer agent, legal advisor, promoters, or other persons connected to the issuer, or the SEA Rule 10b-17 action or other company-related action, are the subject of a pending, adjudicated, or settled regulatory action or investigation by a federal, state, or foreign regulatory agency, or a self-regulatory organization, or a civil or criminal action related to fraud or securities laws violations. George Palikaras and John Brda are still subjects to an SEC investigation that has now resulted in charges related to fraud and manipulation. This stems from events leading up to the merger between Torchlight Energy Resources and MMAT, so it's obvious that this pending investigation would have been addressed during FINRA's Rule 6490 review. One could have made the assumption back then that whatever the SEC investigation pertained to, it must have been minor because it didn't prevent the SEC from making the S1 effective after 4 lengthy amendments. In relation to this investigation, the SEC provided Palikaras and Brda with Wells notices in July of 2023, which possibly factored into the decision by MMAT to remove Palikaras from his role as president and CEO just 3 months later. On January 11, 2024, MMAT announced a proposed settlement relating to the investigation, but it wasn't until June 25, 2024, nearly a year after the Wells notices, that they were formally charged by the SEC. We'll return to this topic later. The next reason FINRA could have used to deem the MMTLP corporate action submission deficient: a state, federal, or foreign authority or self-regulatory organization has provided information to FINRA, or FINRA otherwise has actual knowledge indicating that the issuer, associated persons, officers, directors, transfer agent, legal advisor, promoters, or other persons connected with the issuer, or the SEA Rule 10b-17 action or other company-related action may be potentially involved in fraudulent activities related to the securities markets and/or pose a threat to public investors. On December 5th, one day before FINRA posted the first MMTLP corporate action to their daily list, Sam Draddy, FINRA's Senior Vice President, National Cause and Financial Crimes Detections Programs, Market Investigations Team, sent an email to the SEC. From the message, it's clear that whatever the issue or issues related to MMAT and MMTLP, they weren't entirely new. Draddy points out to this person or group at the SEC that he's aware they've been in contact with Patricia Casamates, FINRA's Vice President of Market Operations and FINRA's General Counsel, presumably including Robert Colby. Draddy informs the SEC that FINRA was looking into the issuers from a fraud/manipulation angle and that they were bluesheeting both companies at that time. The message also indicates that whomever Draddy was corresponding with at the SEC, they were already working on the matter in some capacity. When Draddy said, "Was wondering if it made sense for my fraud team to have a conversation directly with you and your folks working on the matter so we are not duplicating efforts." Combined with the context of the rest of the message and the email thread dating back to November of 2021, it's clear that Sam Draddy's fraud team were just beginning to formally investigate. But whatever investigation was underway by the SEC, Draddy thought it was wise to coordinate in order to prevent duplicating efforts. This also gives the impression, though without certainty, that the SEC hadn't bluesheeted MMAT or MMTLP up to this point. From this same email thread, we know that Draddy later messaged this same SEC contact and scheduled a Zoom call for 1 p.m. Eastern. He later messaged the contact again to reschedule the call for 2 p.m. Eastern. While we don't know the exact nature of what the SEC shared concerning their investigation, the FOIA email thread clearly established the existence of at least 2 separate investigations by FINRA and the SEC, in which MMTLP was at least partially the focus. The fact that FINRA seems to have only begun their bluesheeting investigation on December 5th, a day before they posted the first MMTLP corporate action, one might assume that they were yet to conclude their investigation in the span of 24 hours. After all, wasn't it FINRA that described the blue sheet process as tedious and burdensome? How could they have investigated both tickers that quickly? The final criteria by which FINRA was supposed to check all corporate action submissions before they are published publicly. There is significant uncertainty in the settlement and clearance process for the security. This is the same category of the issue cited by FINRA to U3 Halt trading before the December 9th trading day. I must also add that there wasn't any new information introduced by the issuer. The claim that FINRA only discovered the issue they refer to as an extraordinary event on December 9th is incredibly suspicious. When you add the fact that there were at least 2 other reasons that FINRA could have used to deem the submission deficient, the situation seems more than incredibly suspicious. It seems incredibly criminal. The stress, the anxiety, the feeling of utter helplessness. This situation has taken a heavy toll on the lives of those affected. Marriages and relationships have crumbled. There's been cases of health deterioration as well as depression and despair. All because the regulatory bodies tasked with protecting investors seem to have failed them in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The MMTLP fiasco isn't just about financial loss. It's about the erosion of trust, the human cost of regulatory failure, and the very real possibility that the system, as it stands, is rigged against the investing public. When you look at the initial MMTLP corporate action, it says that MMTLP shareholders with settled positions as of December 12, 2022, record date will receive 1 share of NextBridge Hydrocarbons Inc. for every 1 share of MMTLP held on pay date of December 14, 2022. The final sentence of the corporate action reads, MMTLP shares will be canceled effective December 13, 2022. Now, when you understand all of the scrutiny that surrounded this ticker, the complaints, the fraud tips, the communication with the SEC as far back as November of 2021, the Bluesheet investigation initiated by Sam Brda, and metamaterials working hands-on with FINRA to ensure a smooth process. How did multiple professionals at FINRA overlook the fact that if the shares were canceled on December 13th, there'd be no holders of MMTLP on December 14th entitled to take part in the pay/distribution of NextBridge Hydrocarbons? Had FINRA included the correct December 14th after market close share cancellation date and effective date, the December 6th MMTLP corporate action wouldn't have required a revision. This is especially true since there was still a line that indicated purchases of MMTLP executed after December 8th, 2022, would not receive the distribution. But let's go back to how it was worded. As is, investors that purchased MMTLP on December 8th or sooner were protected because their trades would have settled before the conclusion of the December 12th record date. The brokerages that planned to allow position close only trading on December 9th and December 12th clearly understood that if they allowed a new buy in MMTLP after December 8th, T+2 settlement couldn't occur due to the shares being canceled upon the 0 hour of December 13th. But since an MMTLP long could only sell to an MMTLP short in a position close only scenario, they apparently didn't see it as a problem. However, it still comes back to FINRA for even including December 13th in the first place. If the DTCC didn't request a meeting concerning the corporate action, would FINRA have bothered revising the corporate action? If they didn't, according to FINRA's logic, they'd still be able to claim they discovered a settlement issue before the December 9th trading day. You have to remember, at the time of the revision, based on FINRA's account of the event, FINRA was merely adding clarity concerning FINRA's role. They also include the variable, among other things, but FINRA has never admitted to there being anything wrong. Because of this, whatever problem or problems that existed in the first MMTLP corporate action still existed when they posted the revision. Also, isn't it questionable that of all the communications from brokerages that were shared online, none of them mentioned that investors would be allowed to make new buys in MMTLP after December 8th? So let's just assume that FINRA really cared about protecting the investors that might have somehow purchased MMTLP after December 8th. Let's assume that the UPC committee wasn't aware of FINRA's ability to reverse clearly erroneous trades according to their Rule 11893. After the U3 halt, there was that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday where FINRA was fully aware that investors were severely inconvenienced by the U3 halt. In those 4 days, if FINRA wasn't aware before, they clearly had enough time to see what the brokerages communicated to their clients. FINRA also had those several days during the halt to make sure that the brokerages understood that new buys in MMTLP weren't allowed. So why didn't they work with the issuer to adjust the dates to allow for 2 days of position close only trading? FINRA knew that thousands of investors expected to have the option to sell MMTLP and have access to their money, but they didn't budge. Even if the price action meant that they'd only have the option of selling for a loss, this was the scenario that many investors were prepared to face. In addition, the brokerages don't speak publicly, but FINRA deprived them of the opportunity to get these liabilities off their books. While it is true that a mechanism exists that makes it possible to transfer short positions to a private company, by removing the choice to either force liquidate short positions or to carry those liabilities into a private company. It shows that FINRA has chosen to not see the harm that is depriving us of our right to choose. But brokerages are in a different position. It wasn't their money that was frozen. They're obviously yet to speak out against FINRA because they know FINRA will protect their best interest in arbitration. Before we take a look at the revised MMTLP corporate action, we have to take a detour to profile FINRA UPC committee member Stephen Paul Dapcic. Stephen Paul Dapcic is the Director of Corporate Actions at Pershing LLC, a BNY Mellon company, a member of FINRA's Uniform Practice Committee since March 2015, and Executive Vice President and member of the Corporate Actions Section Executive Board at the Securities Industry Financial Markets Association, SIFMA. This is the description of FINRA's UPC committee directly from his broker check report. A committee designated by the Board of Governors that has the powers to issue interpretations or rulings with respect to the applicability of the codes of the Uniform Practice Committee regarding situations involving no substantial disagreement as to the facts involved in order to make custom, practice usage, and trading technique in the investment banking and securities business more uniform and to simplify the day-to-day business activities of member firms in order to remove causes for business disputes and misunderstandings from lack of uniformity. Simplified, this committee clarifies rules for investment banking and securities firms. It interprets existing codes and makes them more consistent to avoid disputes and misunderstandings. This means that if a member of this committee was aware of a similar situation concerning a corporate action, the whole committee and the market as a whole would benefit from their experience, knowing how to proceed in a manner that is consistent in order to avoid disputes and misunderstandings. This will be important later. This now brings us to Stephen's membership with SIFMA, the Securities Industry Financial Markets Association. Stephen had been affiliated with SIFMA's Corporate Action Section since 2002, and he served as president of the Corporate Action Section of the SIFMA Operations and Technology Society from 2014 to 2015. In the April 2014 SIFMA newsletter from the Corporate Action Section, this is how Stephen Dapcic describes their purpose in his letter from the president. The SIFMA Corporate Action Section is comprised of industry leaders who manage or work within the corporate action space. This consists of broker-dealers, banking institutions, industry utilities, vendors, exchanges, regulators, etc. The section has formed a board of directors, industry leadership board, and advisory board with wide representations from the groups mentioned, and we meet monthly to discuss section business such as industry issues, challenges, and section educational networking events. Our mission is to provide a platform to our membership to discuss, review, and develop solutions to issues and challenges we face in the corporate action and proxy sectors. In addition, we provide value to our membership through hosting educational seminars on key industry and regulatory issues. In the Corporate Actions section update of this newsletter, we have formed several committees and working groups to address an assortment of issues and challenges. I encourage you as members to become more involved in these committees, and please feel free to contact any of the committee chairs or myself to participate. Now, with a full view of Stephen's background, it's safe to say that he takes the business of corporate actions fairly seriously. The SIFMA Corporate Actions section only puts out 2 newsletters, a spring and fall edition. As president, you'd have to especially imagine that any examples of lessons learned from corporate actions that were important enough to be mentioned in the newsletters would likely have a lasting influence on anything similar they found themselves involved with in the future. On page 4 of the newsletter, in a section titled Corporate Actions and Bankruptcy Courts, they discuss a company called Kit Digital. Kit Digital was emerging from bankruptcy, and it was their intention to offer all holders of their old common stock an opportunity to subscribe to purchase new shares of the new company emerging from bankruptcy. In declaring the event, the bankruptcy documents noted that the record date for holders to be entitled to the disbursement would be August 8, 2013. There was no ex-date declared for the event, and trading in the old security continued through close of business, August 8th, which would have market participants believe all trades done up to and through August 8th carried the subscription entitlement with it. Unfortunately, this was not the case. In this matter, it was determined by the bankruptcy attorneys that it was the court's intention for settled holders, as of the August 8th date, to be the only individuals entitled to the distribution. As such, any individual who had open buy trades executed in the market with a settlement date beyond the 8th would not be entitled to receive the subscription rights, even though paying full price for the shares. In the end, leaving many investors and broker-dealers scratching their proverbial heads as to what just happened. It was noted that this was a time when the community was trying to restore investor confidence in financial markets, but this was an instance where they appeared to have failed. They concluded that there needs to be a broader engagement between the bankruptcy participants, broker-dealers, trading, and our depository community to ensure such events are handled correctly, consistently, and efficiently in the markets. If it isn't exactly clear, the problem in this example was that they neglected to include in the corporate action that the trades needed to be settled by the August 8th record date in order to be entitled to the distribution. They could have even included an extra level of protection by including something like, maybe. Purchases of KITD executed after August 6, 2013 will not receive the distribution. Had they done something like that, it wouldn't even have been up to the investing public to read the corporate action in order to know not to buy KITD after August 6th. It would have been the fiduciary responsibility of each individual brokerage to put measures in place to prevent new KITD purchases after August 6th. Both MMTLP corporate actions made it perfectly clear that positions needed to be settled by December 12, 2022. Both MMTLP corporate actions also included a line that read, "Purchases of MMTLP executed after December 8, 2022 will not receive the distribution." So 3 months after the U3 halt, why did FINRA say in their March 16th FAQ that they U3 halted MMTLP to protect investors that might have purchased MMTLP after December 8, 2022? Both MMTLP corporate actions contained clear instruction for the corporate action departments of each brokerage. They knew not to allow new buys in MMTLP after December 8th because those investors wouldn't receive the next Bridge Hydrocarbons distribution. Now let's look back at the December 9th UPC halt notice for MMTLP. It reads, OTC symbol MMTLP. Pursuant to Rule 6440A3, FINRA has determined that an extraordinary event has occurred or is ongoing that has caused or has the potential to cause significant uncertainty in the settlement and clearance process for shares in MMTLP, and that, therefore, halting trading and quoting in MMTLP is necessary to protect investors and the public interest. It goes on to say that the trading and quoting halt will end concurrent with the deletion of the symbol effective Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. But if the settlement issue was protecting investors from making a purchase that didn't entitle them to receive the distribution, why was the solution to halt trading until the symbol was deleted? Wouldn't it have been a better solution to just ensure that all brokerages understood the instructions that were already in both corporate actions, then work with the issuer to make the necessary adjustments in order to facilitate 2 position close, only trading days? This solution would have prevented both the settlement issue that we've now endured for over 18 months and the pretend settlement issue that FINRA fabricated in their FAQ. Here's the truth. The UPC committee, with their over 200 years of combined experience, they didn't U3 halt MMTLP due to the extraordinary event that was forgetting to protect new buys after December 8th. It's more believable that they U3 halted trading in MMTLP because the regulators neglected to enforce the rules concerning short selling. As a result, broker-dealers and various market participants on the short side of MMTLP would have taken significant losses, and this would have also had a significant impact on the market as a whole. What's the easiest way to prove this? Just ask Stephen Paul Dapcic under oath. Given his intimate knowledge of the issue with the KITD corporate action, is it really true that the extraordinary event was that FINRA forgot to protect the investors that might have tried to purchase MMTLP after December 8th? Circling back to the SEC's recent charges against John Brda and George Palikaras, the MMTLP community has pointed out that this tactic by the SEC is an expected consequence for issuers and/or individuals that bring too much attention to the fraud and manipulation that goes unaddressed by the regulators. This phenomena is well documented in the Wall Street Conspiracy documentary, particularly in the segment featuring Patrick Byrne, formerly of Overstock. If we were to just make a cursory observation of the circumstances surrounding Overstock and Torchlight, you'll see that there are some interesting similarities. Both companies believed they were victims of market manipulation that negatively impacted their share prices. Both companies were made aware that complaining to regulators would likely result in being met with litigation. Rather than complaining, both companies sought novel approaches that were approved by regulators to protect their companies and their shareholders. Overstock issued a first-of-its-kind digital dividend, OSTKO, that was only intended to trade on the T0 platform. Torchlight issued a dividend placeholder to shareholders that held Torchlight shares through the reverse merger with MetaMaterials. This dividend placeholder was never intended to trade. The Overstock dividend traded on the OTC against the wishes of Overstock. Overstock complained to FINRA, and their lawyers contacted Ari Rubenstein of GTS Securities concerning his involvement. FINRA ultimately sided with Ari Rubenstein and GTS Securities, allowing them to continue trading the dividend on the OTC. The Torchlight/MetaMaterials dividend became tradable on the OTC approximately 4 months after the merger. FINRA assigned it the trading symbol MMTLP. This was a surprise to investors and to company leadership. Complaints were made to FINRA and to OTC markets, including that the information used to get it trading was outdated and inaccurate. Rather than halting trading, FINRA said there was nothing that could be done, but they did offer to allow them to correct the inaccurate information. From an October 14, 2021 response from TD Ameritrade to a client, TD Ameritrade revealed that Ari Rubenstein's GTS Securities and Canaccord Genuity were the market makers involved in what appears to be the earliest trades in MMTLP. Ari Rubenstein, CEO of GTS Securities, has been a member of FINRA's Market Surveillance Advisory Group since as early as 2017. Rubenstein is also a founder of high-frequency trading lobbyist organization Modern Markets Initiative. During the controversy surrounding the trading of the Overstock dividend on the OTC, Georgetown professor James Angel, or Jim Angel, as he's known in his role as an advisor for Modern Markets Initiative, portrayed himself as an Overstock shareholder and complained that being limited to the T0 platform raises fundamental questions concerning the rights of shareholders. After FINRA U3 halted MMTLP on December 9, 2022, a social media presence developed in which the common theme appeared to be displeasure in FINRA's rare use of the U3 halt, their lack of transparency regarding the reason for doing so, and the resulting settlement issue due to prematurely ending trading by 2 days. It was notable that Georgetown professor James Angel claimed to also be a shareholder, but he had a unique perspective on social media. Angel pointed the blame at the issuer for what he called the sleazy action of making his MMTLP shares illiquid. He was vocally in favor of making NextBridge tradable, and he incorrectly claimed that the privatization of NextBridge occurred without following the appropriate procedure. We soon learned that the program he's associated with at Georgetown is directly linked to FINRA. I'm not as up to date regarding what other attacks Overstock might have faced, but it's interesting that nearly every prominent voice that has spoken out against MMTLP can be linked back to Ari Rubenstein and his companies in some way. These links are highlighted in the video, MMTLP, the red flags ignored by the SEC. It'll be linked below. Something else interesting, but not related to Overstock, is that the SEC has already charged a group of retail investors of pumping the price of Torchlight leading up to the merger. There's an AWS video on YouTube touting the capabilities of FINRA CAT that actually shows that the CAT system was instrumental in the SEC's investigation. So we know the SEC has seen the CAT data for Torchlight. Are we to believe that they didn't notice any other irregularities? The case was dismissed, by the way, but it also added to the disturbing trend on behalf of the SEC of abusing their authority and overstepping boundaries, which likely factored into why the case was dismissed. But there are more examples. In the case of Atlas Energy, the SEC was criticized for their aggressive investigation tactics regarding improper revenue recognition. When the SEC investigated Elon Musk about his tweets to take Tesla private, it resulted in a settlement that required Musk to step down as chairman and pay a fine. Critics viewed this outcome as overly punitive and a failure to address the underlying market issues. In the case of the Stanford Financial Group, the SEC faced criticism for its delayed response to the Ponzi scheme. Despite multiple warnings, the SEC's inaction allowed the fraud to expand significantly, which led to substantial losses for investors. The Madoff Ponzi scheme is a more extreme version of the Stanford case, because the SEC ignored complaints and red flags for nearly 2 decades. This, of course, resulted in being one of the largest cases of financial fraud in history, as well as one of the most grotesque examples of regulatory oversight failure. Side note, Bernie Madoff's relationship with the regulators seemingly aided his ability to avoid detection. Ari Rubinstein's role as member of FINRA's Market Surveillance Advisory Group included leveraging his technology to root out nefarious activity from other high-frequency trading firms. But while Ari Rubinstein was aiding FINRA, a multi-year investigation that the New York Stock Exchange concluded in 2023 revealed that GTS Securities was engaged in a variety of market manipulation, spanning approximately 6 years, nearly the entire time that GTS has been a market maker on the NYSE. And crypto cases aren't off limits. How long did the SEC hold back Ripple? Then there's the debt box case, where the SEC's actions were seen as overreaching. Critics argued that the SEC's approach stifled innovation and failed to provide clear regulatory guidance to an emerging industry. Then, of course, there's the outspoken CEO of GNS, Roger Hamilton, whom has since learned that speaking out against fraud and manipulation comes at a cost. He continues to fight, but not as loudly. I do think that Devin Nunes and DJT are uniquely positioned to combat manipulation due to his congressional background, potentially without the same regulatory retaliation that has become all too familiar. But we can't forget that when they found an issue with their auditor, the media attempted to use it against DJT. In Discovery, we're likely to learn if Torchlight Energy Resources was just a bad company, or if they were abusively manipulated by nefarious market participants. If it is indeed the latter, isn't it the fiduciary responsibility of the company to protect their investors? If you held stock in a company that went bankrupt, you'd likely lose everything. But if that company sought counsel and learned that they could seek out a merger partner seeking to list on the NASDAQ and at the same time distribute the company assets to the shareholders in the form of a dividend, wouldn't this be in the best interest of shareholders? The SEC was involved in the process. There was no way for Torchlight and Metamaterials to be any more transparent during the process, including the fact that the SEC approved the offering that is apparently now in question. The irony in all of this is that Torchlight seemingly recognized that manipulative short selling was a contributing factor to their inability to build long-term shareholder value. This means that no amount of good decisions short of perhaps a buyout by a major player would have deterred the short sellers from continuing to pile on. Even Metamaterials had a more promising business plan, but as of the publication of this video, they are down nearly 98% since the merger. So again, if the role of a CEO is to provide long-term shareholder value, how are they supposed to do so if the rules concerning abusive short selling aren't enforced? Also, if there isn't a problem concerning abusive short selling, why is it currently impossible for Wes Christian to obtain trading data for MMTLP? The MMTLP saga isn't just a story about a single security, a trading halt, or even a regulatory blunder. It's a symptom of a much deeper problem, a crisis of confidence in the very institutions that are supposed to safeguard our financial system. When the watchdogs are caught playing poker with the foxes, when the rules seem to be written in disappearing ink, when the people tasked with protecting investors turn a blind eye to red flags the size of billboards, it breeds cynicism, apathy, and a gnawing sense that the game is rigged from the start. The damage goes far beyond the financial losses suffered by individual investors, though those are devastating enough. It erodes faith in the markets, discourages participation, and undermines the very foundation of a healthy economy. Who wants to play a game where the referees are on the take, where the rules change without notice, and where the house always seems to win? It's a recipe for disaster, a slow-burning crisis that threatens to engulf us all. So where do we go from here? How do we begin to repair the damage, to rebuild trust in a system that seems determined to betray it? The answer, as with most complex problems, is multifaceted and requires a collective effort. We need transparency, a spotlight shown on the inner workings of organizations like FINRA, exposing conflicts of interest, holding decision-makers accountable, and ensuring that the rules are applied fairly and consistently. We need accountability, not just empty apologies and finger-pointing, but real consequences for those who abuse their power, who prioritize profits over people, who treat investor protection as an afterthought. And most importantly, we need to remember that the system is only as strong as the people who believe in it. We need to demand better, to raise our voices, to hold our elected officials accountable for ensuring that the markets work for everyone, not just the privileged few.